The B-side announcement has just come through, and it's called Flashpoint. We're here right now with Semmler, who is the official spokesperson for the league, and we're here to talk a little bit about that. You know, he's been back and he's been in blast, but now there's a few slightly difficult questions that we have to ask you. One of the more controversial things that's been talked about so far has been the $100,000 fine for teams. Now, one very quick detail that hasn't really been cleared out is there going to be a grace period for teams? So for example, if they just dropped out of the top 20, or if they've added new rosters, if they've added new players, do teams get a chance to say, hey, you've got 2 months to have some breathing room?
That's a very good question, but as far as we are aware right now, I'm not aware of a grace period being in play. I'm pretty sure that it is going to be a case where they are fined if they do not meet the minimum requirements for participation in the league. And so it is not as far as I know right now, there are no buys in place. That being said, I mean, incredible circumstances or anything like that, perhaps something can be revised. But as far as I know right now, the fine stands and the requirements for that fine stand.
Right. So one of the other things that has been discussed in light of this is how much money teams are actually losing in Counter-Strike. With statements being made from Cloud9 for Double Tap, I think it was DK doing the interview, where Dan Fidan said that they're losing between $1 million and $2 million per year for Counter-Strike rosters. And to a lot of people, this seems like the B-side or the Flashpoint League is a little bit of a last stand for them to try and recompense their losses. Is that sort of what it seems like on the inside as well?
A last stand? I mean, it really is just, let's say, at some point you have to put a tourniquet on. At some point you have to actually figure out how it's going to work when behind the scenes many of these esports organizations are just hemorrhaging money. At some point you have to come up with a model that's actually going to be profitable. This is a business after all. And yes, we're all passionate about esports. It's all what we want to do and love to do. But at some point you do have to make money when you're doing a job. And so right now what these teams have aligned themselves with is to, and everybody, there's a lot of focus on the teams right now, but there's also a tremendous amount of focus on the players from our perspective. Not only are the teams owners in the league, the players are also a big part of it as well, and they get the biggest rev share across esports as far as we know, in any way that the players across esports get. And so not only is it a focus on the teams, it's a focus on the players, and it's a focus on trying to find a model that can actually turn a profit and lead into the future, because we don't want esports to just keep going along the way that it is right now, where there's a lot of VC money that keeps coming into the space. We keep hearing all these blown up figures about how it's a multi-billion dollar industry, and everybody hears that and thinks, oh man, I need to be a part of this. And are they being misled? What we want to show is no, there is a way forward, there is a path that makes sense and that is profitable for everybody involved.
Well, on that note, because of course it is the pursuit of profitability that you're discussing over here, the other question that has to be asked is that in the pursuit of profitability, do we expect this league to potentially expand in terms of the calendar years? Because at the end of the day, from what reports have said, and I'm sure you can't confirm this, but because the calendar, like the press conference mentioned, isn't completely set. But as reports have said, it's probably going to be taking between 2 and 3 months per year, which isn't really all that much. So do you think that in the future we need to be wary of potentially a calendar expansion in the same way, for example, an ESL has a vast majority of the calendar right now?
Well, it's not even just ESL, it's MTG at that point, right? Because you have to consider DreamHack are also owned by the same mother company as ESL, and so I can't remember what it was, 36 weeks out of 44 possible, I think they had in the last year. And so, yes, okay, fair enough, but the reason why they have to expand so hard is because they need to try and control as much of the market as possible, because they're hemorrhaging money. And so they need to have that. If, again, we can really put the emphasis on our league, again, there is no third party. There is no third party here. There's FACEIT as the league operator, and then there's the teams and the players. And so the teams, when it talks about if you can actually make it so that this league is a profitable one in a reasonable amount of time, then the teams directly benefit, and you can see how $1.5 million to $2 million, when you're talking about their operating budgets, is not a huge sum of money, especially when you're talking about over the span of 5 years a $2 million investment to buy into the franchise. Even that's not that big in the grand scheme of things. These are all figures that could work, but they can't just keep going at the same rate right now, where it's just okay, just burn $2 million and leave it at that. Like, if you need to start somewhere, and so starting somewhere is this. As far as I'm aware right now, the goal is not to swallow up the calendar year the way that MTG has attempted to do. No. And there are no plans for that in the future, because, again, we do stand by the fact that we want there to be open competition, because we think that open competition actually is beneficial for everybody involved in the industry. It pushes standards up. I mean, the likes of Duncan, Monty, myself, we've been tied into this for a very long time. And in terms of improving, let's just take improving CSGO broadcasts. If it weren't for competing leagues trying to push the envelope event after event, we'd probably be still sitting there looking at, Go TV, wondering, hey, like, oh, that's cool. Who knows where we would have been. And so I'm a firm believer in competition to force you to be innovative and keep improving your product. If you wind up in a monopolistic situation where one team rules it all, or one TO, right, rules it all, then I only see stagnation there. So, no, I don't think it's the goal right now to snuff things. I think instead it's to find our space and then allow for there to be competition to drive the industry forward.
Well, competition seems to be something that obviously the site has said it's very keen on. But the other thing that we've heard from the other side, and this is in the recent By the Numbers that was done, I think is episode 105, where Richard Lewis had Carmack and Ulrich Schulze, even though I'm not sure.
I haven't had the opportunity to listen to that.
Well, one of the statements that they essentially espoused was that ESL and therefore MTG believes that ESL and therefore MTG believes that you need to have one entity kind of going for these media rights and whatnot. Their words were that it should be a seller's market, not a buyer's market, without which perhaps profitability would be a little bit harder to come across, was the implication over there. You guys obviously have a very different philosophy to that. Do you think that you will be going for anything other than the traditional media rights and whatnot to make fans spend the money you guys need for profitability?
Well, what we're looking at right now is setting up a trim machine, right? No fat on this beast. We want to go in and we want to be very lean in how we set up the system. There aren't any extra frills, there aren't anything that we do not need to put the product together and to make it so that the teams and the players and everybody gets the best experience possible, the viewers as well. But that doesn't, and so no, I think that gives us the agility to be able to move in the space that the way that we need to be able to move to find that profitability. When you're talking about monoliths that have existed for many years and who have existed in the space for many years and who have perhaps not been as agile and have put themselves in a position where they cannot be as agile, then yes, perhaps they need to manipulate the market in a way that is necessary for them to turn a profit. We do not, because we are agile in that sense, we're not bound by the same restrictions, and we can find profitability perhaps elsewhere where in ways that they cannot. But again, I haven't listened to that podcast yet, and so I do want to, because for obvious reasons I do want to listen to it. Just haven't quite had the time yet. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say on that, I think.
No, that's fair enough. The other thing that you guys have, talked about a lot, and this is what Dan Fidan, the president of Cloud9 Group, was saying, was that they've been very careful about involvement with Valve. And that's always been something that we hear about in Counter-Strike, that Valve is kind of the hovering guardian angel that doesn't really bring its sword down, except maybe to ban Steel for a while longer. But the question for me is that, has there been any leeway in this, in the sense of in-game monetization and things like that being attached to leagues? Has that conversation ever come up in this league in particular? How did that go, if you know anything about it?
No, as far as I know, there's nothing on the table in that aspect from Valve. Valve have always had, they've always wanted to just focus on the majors and leave their involvement at the majors because those are Valve sponsored. Valve are always very careful about favoritism and putting themselves in a position where they would be bound to do the same for everyone that they've done for one, right? And so they do not like setting precedent. Valve are very careful about that, and understandably so. They're busy running Steam. They've got their own thing on the table, and so we're very lucky to have Valve in the sense that Valve are very free with the license to operate CS events, and they want it that way. They created the game. They still benefit from what we're doing with esports, and they're happy to leave it at that. And apart from the majors, obviously, which is their 2 events that they put on throughout the year, or that they sponsor, let's say, throughout the year. But as far as in-game items or promotions, I mean, the way that I can see it is that Valve perhaps will have promotions in the games for these leagues if they decide. But even then, they've been very, hit or miss with that in the past, laissez-faire with that in the past. The thing is that I like that. Yeah. I'm totally fine with Valve just letting us operate and letting us do our thing. So long as we respect the rules that they've set out, which are, obviously non-exclusivity, etc. So long as we're respecting those rules, I'm perfectly fine operating in a space where Valve just let everybody compete and do their thing and do not try to step in and intervene here and there, apart from, what they've kind of gone forward with the minors and the majors and how the qualifiers are going to work out. They've recently come out with some news that's going to make things a little bit more complicated in the second half of the year, as far as tournament scheduling is concerned. I'm a little bit miffed perhaps with Valve and how they're approaching that, but in terms of what they're doing for monetization on our side, no. And I don't think that we should have that. I think it's good that they keep their game and they keep their space, and we have our space, and we get to operate together in it, and that's.
Well, just last question, which is that we have seen in recent history things. You obviously were in Overwatch, so in recent history things like the Twitch Overwatch Pass, where fans have a way to spend money in via collaboration between tournament organizer, which was Blizzard, Activision Blizzard in that case, and Twitch, or the platform of streaming. Anything in the works similar to that?
I can't speak on anything, but I'm a big fan.
You guys know what that means. And on that note, because that's where Semmler's run out of things to say that he can talk about, but keep an eye on that space. But Semmler, thank you so much. And remember, you guys can check out the Flashpoint. The announcements are probably up. And this has been GG Intel with Semmler signing off.